There is a rising threat to civilian and commercial aircraft that many people do not think about, and is rarely discussed. That is the MANPAD, short for Man-Portable Air Defense. These are small missiles that can easily be carried and fired by a single person, that are designed to lock on and shoot down aircraft. They are relatively simple weapons, a missile made up of a warhead, a rocket motor to propel it, and a seeker on the front to guide it, typically infrared. That missile is launched from a tube with a sight and a battery. An estimated 500,000 of these weapons have been built, tens of thousands which are believed to be in the hands of non-state actors, such as terrorist groups. Despite it not receiving much attention, since 1970, around 50 civilian aircraft have been hit by these missiles, causing nearly 1,000 deaths. And with the political instability in places like the Middle East, where massive numbers of these systems were stockpiled, the threat posed is greater than ever. MANPADS were developed in the 1950s to provide some protection to vulnerable ground units from aerial attack. The newly developed fast jet aircraft made conventional AAA systems job a nightmare. The use of helicopters in this period also greatly expanded. Their ability to fly low, attack their targets, and escape was also difficult to defend against. Ground units needed a better solution. Guided missile technology was brand new at the time, but quickly developed, and eventually made small enough to fit on board a man-portable system. Probably the most notable use of MANPADS was during the Soviet war in Afghanistan. In the 1980s, the US sent thousands of Red-Eye and the more popular Stinger missiles to groups fighting against the Soviets. The numbers are extremely disputed, but these MANPADS were responsible for over 100 shootdowns, and possibly many times more. The Stinger is sometimes credited with turning the tide of the war against the Russians. The Soviets had to quickly adapt their strategy accordingly. In combat, there are several methods of minimizing the threat of MANPADS. One technique was simply to fly up and out of their range. And that is the one good limiting factor of these systems in terms of civilian air traffic. As MANPADS need to be small enough to be carried by a single person, their missiles are limited in range. Most can only reach targets up to 2 to 4 kilometers in altitude. Some newer systems can reach slightly higher altitudes, but still much lower than most passenger aircraft, which often fly up around 10 to 12 kilometers. This more or less limits the threat to when the aircraft is ascending or descending after takeoff or before landing, which means the aircraft are most susceptible in roughly a 75 by 10 kilometer rectangle following the runway. Some older, smaller aircraft do cruise at lower altitudes, which makes them vulnerable throughout their whole flight. As I said, there have been about 50 incidents in which MANPADS have shot down civilian aircraft. Unsurprisingly, nearly every one of these occur in active conflict zones. Fortunately, these attacks have not spread, but the risk is growing. During the Cold War, these weapons were somewhat more controlled and monitored by the superpowers, but toward the end, many Soviet-aligned states were facing economic hardship. Their huge stockpiles of these weapons began to get out. With money lacking, some generals, and even government officials began selling off weapons, along with MANPADS, on the black market to the highest bidder. The late 80s and early 90s saw several high-profile shootdowns of civilian aircraft with these weapons. More recently, with the so-called Arab Spring earlier this decade, several dictators were overthrown, and again the large stockpiles of weapons these leaders built up began to flood the black market. The US, along with many other nations, have worked to control and track down and recover weapons lost. In Libya, after the fall of Gaddafi, an estimated 20,000 MANPADS were at risk of falling into the wrong hands. The US began a massive program, spending millions to secure and actually purchase these weapons on the black market, in an attempt to proactively lower the risk of these systems being used against the US, but also civilian aircraft. This is one side of the equation, stopping the bad guys from getting these weapons in the first place. Another is to mitigate the effectiveness and opportunities to use MANPADS. There are a few different types of guidance systems used in MANPADS. Command line of sight, like the UK's blowpipe. This is where the operator actually steers a missile to its target via controls. Laser beam riding, like Sweden's RBS-70, which uses a laser that paints the target for the missile to follow. And IR, or infrared homing, used by the US Stinger, Soviet Strela, and many more. IR is by far the most popular. Using IR is extremely useful targeting aircraft, as its hot jet engines used for flying stand out really well against the cold surrounding sky. The issue is, though, that they can be deceived by other hot objects. Flares have been used for decades to throw off IR missiles, creating another source of heat which hopefully the IR-guided missile locks onto instead of the aircraft. There are also pods that can be installed to throw off IR-guided missiles using pulsing patterns of IR energy and lasers to shine at the missile seeker. Many of these systems' technology unsurprisingly comes from military devices, like the ALQ-144. Northrop Grumman's Guardian and Israeli Eilat's Flight Guard are two popular systems already actively protecting civilian, commercial, and governmental aircraft. They are automatic, requiring virtually zero input from the pilot or crew, and able to detect, track, and counter IR-guided missiles like MANPADS. The main drawback of these is the price. Most systems cost well over $1 million, making it too expensive for most airlines, especially considering the lack of such attacks occurring outside of war zones. They are also not always successful. These systems have failed many times in combat, as different MANPADS have different seekers with differing specifications, so it's not always possible to protect against them. As you could imagine, airports are the biggest threat. Instead of placing these systems on each aircraft, it is possible to defend the area just surrounding the airports when the aircraft are most vulnerable. While police and counterintelligence agencies do all they can to prevent such incidents, there are new technologies emerging to protect against these attacks. Lasers have been proposed to destroy these missiles in flight. Powerful microwave and other electronic warfare systems could focus a directed signal at the missile and fry its guidance system, but most of these are still in early stages of development and not ready for operational use. There really is, unfortunately, no one-size-fits-all solution to the problem. And with the number of these systems available to terrorist groups and their relatively low price, it's honestly incredible we haven't seen more attacks. Hopefully, it stays that way. And before you go, I want to talk about a real cool game I came across called the Life Simulator. In the game, you get to make choices on how to run your life. You can live your life any way you want. You can even be a cop or a soldier, and even work your way up to become the major of the army. There are so many options. On top of that, you pick where you want to live, pay rent, have to manage your work life, social life, your health, happiness, and more. My girlfriend in the game actually just ended up breaking up with me for ignoring her, and I've been working on getting my business degree while flipping burgers, all while sleeping on a park bench to save money. There is a seemingly endless amount of options. You can even start a YouTube channel as a side gig to make extra money. It's a really addicting game. I've actually had a lot of fun playing it, and honestly I'm going to keep playing it. The game has great reviews on the App Store, a lot of people love it, and I can honestly say that I'm one of them. And it's free too, so go check it out on the App Store on your iPhone. Again, that is the Life Simulator. Give it a try.